Open the door! Damn it! Open up! Germanwings 18 Golf, confirm your current altitude. Germanwings, this is Marseille. Respond immediately.
Green. Pull up.
Morning of March 24, 2015, 8:30 a.m. local time. At El Prat Airport in Barcelona, Spain, an Airbus A320 belonging to the budget airline Germanwings, a subsidiary of Lufthansa, was being refueled and prepared for its next flight. The flight number was Germanwings 9525, with a destination of Düsseldorf, Germany. On board were 144 passengers and 6 crew members, including 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots. The captain, Patrick Sondenheimer, was 34 years old and had over 6,000 flight hours, an experienced pilot. The co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, was 27 years old and had joined Germanwings in 2014. He had logged around 630 flight hours, most of which were still under supervision. After completing all pre-flight procedures, the Airbus A320 began taxiing to the runway. At 10 a.m. Central European Time, air traffic control gave clearance for takeoff. Under the soft spring sunlight, Flight 9525 took off smoothly into the sky. At 10:12 a.m., about 10 minutes into the flight, a flight attendant entered the cockpit. The pilots chatted casually about the situation at the airport, including a 26-minute delay before departure. During the conversation, the captain mentioned that he forgot to use the restroom before takeoff, and said he would go once the plane reached cruising altitude, 38,000 feet. Lubitz calmly responded, "You can go anytime." The captain didn't think much of it at the time. The conversation then moved to preparations for landing, a routine procedure during short flights. Lubitz made a strange, vague comment that would later seem very unsettling. Hopefully, we'll see. At the time, it sounded like a normal offhand remark, so the captain didn't pay attention to it. By 10:27 a.m., the plane had reached its cruising altitude of 38,000 feet. The pilots contacted Marseille Air Traffic Control in France to confirm they were flying at the correct altitude. A few minutes later, Marseille gave them instructions to head to the next navigation point. The captain told Lubitz he was going to use the restroom and temporarily handed over control of the plane and radio communication to the co-pilot. As soon as the captain left the cockpit, Lubitz locked the door from inside. Just 19 seconds later, Lubitz took his first action. He turned the altitude dial on the cockpit control panel, setting the target altitude to 100 feet, the lowest possible setting allowed by the aircraft system. The autopilot then activated descent mode, causing the plane to start descending by adjusting the nose angle downward, while keeping the speed steady. The engines reduced power to idle. The plane began to descend gradually, at first steeply, then stabilizing at a rate of around 3,000 feet per minute. While this rate of descent was fast enough to be noticeable, it was still within safe technical limits, so air traffic controllers didn't immediately see it as a problem.
1 minute and 40 seconds after the descent began, the co-pilot started adjusting the plane's target airspeed multiple times using the autopilot panel. He first set it to 273 knots, then gradually increased it to 308 knots, then quickly reduced it and raised it again. This series of continuous changes might have been an attempt to test the aircraft system's limits or create false data fluctuations in the flight recorder, making the descent look normal. By now, Flight 9525 had dropped below 30,000 feet. On the ground, at Marseille Air Traffic Control, a controller finally noticed something was wrong. The plane's descent rate was far too fast for normal operations. There had been no communication from the cockpit and no emergency call. The controller tried to contact the flight via radio, but got no reply from the co-pilot. He tried again. Still silence. On radar, the controller could see the aircraft was off its intended route and continuing to descend rapidly. He sent 2 more radio messages, but Lubitz remained completely silent. No answer, no explanation, just total silence. Then the co-pilot made another adjustment. He increased the target airspeed to 323 knots. Under these circumstances, even this small action was a major red flag. At 10:34 a.m. local time, the captain finished using the restroom and tried to re-enter the cockpit. He typed the security code on the keypad outside the door. Inside the cockpit, a chime sounded, indicating that someone outside was requesting access. But Lubitz didn't respond. The door stayed locked. The captain knocked on the door and called out firmly, but there was no answer. Inside, Lubitz manually activated a special security function that disabled the keypad for 5 minutes, blocking even the correct code. Realizing something was seriously wrong, the captain triggered the emergency unlock protocol, a final backup method meant for crisis situations. But the cockpit door remained locked. Lubitz had already manually overridden the emergency system. At that moment, the cockpit door, designed to protect flight safety, had now become an unbreakable barrier. As the aircraft descended below 25,000 feet, Lubitz adjusted the speed, setting it to 350 knots, the maximum manually settable speed in the system. The autopilot responded by nosing the aircraft down even more. The plane began to dive faster. This once routine flight was now plunging toward the ground at terrifying speed. The cockpit phone kept ringing, but Lubitz ignored every signal from the outside world. Outside, the captain realized the plane was in a steep dive. He began banging on the door, yelling in panic and anger. "For God's sake, open the door!" But the cockpit remained completely silent. There was no more time to wait. The captain called for the flight attendants, telling them to bring a metal bar or crowbar, anything that might help break down the door. In the following seconds, the captain desperately tried to smash through the steel cockpit door. But the aircraft kept descending. Meanwhile, air traffic control kept sending radio messages, still trying to reach Flight 9525. On radar screens, the plane's altitude kept dropping. There were no emergency calls, no request for diversion, no explanation, only a falling aircraft and an eerie silence. "10:30 a.m. The aircraft had now entered a critical danger zone. The French Air Force activated the International Emergency Frequency, trying one last time to make contact. But the only response was silence. Inside the cabin, panic was spreading like wildfire. Some passengers were screaming, others praying, and many were desperately calling loved ones to say their final goodbyes. Outside the cockpit, the captain was still doing everything he could to break the door down, but the reinforced cockpit door didn't budge. Ironically, this door was originally designed to prevent terrorist hijackings, yet now it was blocking the only person who could have saved the plane. Inside the cockpit, co-pilot Andreas Lubitz sat motionless. His breathing was steady, his eyes stared straight ahead, and his hands calmly rested on the controls. 10:41 a.m. Flight 9525 disappeared from Marseille Air Traffic Control's radar. At the same time, residents near the town of Digne-les-Bains in the French Alps saw something strange. An Airbus flying unusually low, passing overhead, heading into the mountains. Then, the aircraft disappeared behind the peaks, into a narrow mountain valley. Just seconds later, the plane slammed nose first into a sheer cliff wall. The impact was so violent it shredded the aircraft into pieces, raining metal and plastic debris across the gray mountain slopes. A deep, echoing boom sounded through the valley. Then, total silence. 10:48. The French Air Force scrambled a Mirage fighter jet, rushing to the last known location of Flight 9525. 11:01. The fighter pilot arrived at the scene and saw smoke and scattered debris. The wreckage was spread across the bottom of the remote Rosé Valley. Rescue helicopters were dispatched immediately. But when they arrived, the once intact Airbus A320 was now reduced to fragments. The largest piece was only a few meters long. The fuselage had been completely destroyed, scattered across the cold, rocky slopes. A deep, echoing boom sounded through the valley. Then, total silence. 10:48. The French Air Force scrambled a Mirage fighter jet, rushing to the last known location of Flight 9525. 11:01. The fighter pilot arrived at the scene and saw smoke and scattered debris. The wreckage was spread across the bottom of the remote Rosé Valley. Rescue helicopters were dispatched immediately. But when they arrived, the once intact Airbus A320 was now reduced to fragments. The largest piece was only a few meters long. The fuselage had been completely destroyed, scattered across the cold, rocky slopes. Just minutes later, rescue teams gave a heartbreaking confirmation. All 150 passengers and crew on board had died. The investigation. Based on black box data and on-site analysis, an official investigation was launched. Just 2 days after the crash, the French Civil Aviation Safety Bureau, BEA, held a press conference. They announced a finding that shocked the world. The crash of Germanwings Flight 9525 was not an accident. It was deliberately caused by the co-pilot. This statement was broadcast globally, instantly changing the direction of the investigation and triggering an industry-wide shock. Who was Andreas Lubitz? According to friends and past records, Andreas Lubitz had appeared normal in childhood, showing no signs of serious mental issues. As an adult, he was described as calm, outgoing, and capable. He stood out among thousands of applicants, becoming one of just 384 candidates accepted into a commercial pilot training program. At first, he was seen as a promising student. But in the summer of 2008, he began experiencing serious mental health problems, including deep depression and suicidal thoughts. He was hospitalized briefly and prescribed antidepressants, which helped stabilize him for a while. But in April 2009, to meet aviation medical standards, he discontinued treatment. In July 2009, he was declared fit to fly again, on the condition that if symptoms returned, his medical license would be revoked. During pilot training in the United States, Lubitz failed to disclose his history of mental illness to the FAA. Although this was later discovered, he was still issued a restricted medical certificate. By 2011, he joined Lufthansa, initially as a flight attendant, and later transferred to Germanwings. In late 2014, he became a qualified co-pilot on the A320. Between 2009 and 2014, he regularly passed medical exams and got recertified. However, by late 2014, his depression returned. He began complaining of blurred or lost vision, but doctors couldn't find any physical cause. They suspected he was suffering from somatic symptom disorder. Fearing he'd lose his flying license, Lubitz refused